In this episode, we're going to look at getting the strut towers fabricated for both sides of the car, along with the upper arm mounts, so that we can get the subframe remounted with all the suspension components, so that we can get ready to put some wheels on. First job, I've cut out a load more of this inner wing. I'll have to do the same the other side as well. And I'll probably need to cut out more of this. But at the minute, I just want to focus on getting these rear subframe mounts, get some strength and material back in them, because obviously originally they were tied into the original chassis legs a bit sturdier than they are into our new ones. So I want to kind of build up a really substantial mount for the subframe to go onto. So what I've got is I've cleaned up my plate. I've got a piece of tube which has a bigger internal diameter than I need. And I'm going to attach that to the side of the chassis leg, attach the plate to the tube, and then put another plate on top, and then kind of box it all round to create a really nice sturdy mount. I've got the jig that we made off the Jag bolted in place on the near side, and I've made up 2 strut towers just like I did for the back suspension. And basically this will go onto the top like that. And then what I'll do is, it's a case of replicating, I guess, the mount positions just like they were on the Jag using the jig. So I'm going to need to replicate for the upper arm and the strut top. They'll probably be like welded together, and then there'll also be some way to tie this onto the new chassis leg. So it's just going to be a case now of getting these bolted on, thinking about how we're going to do the upper arm mounts, and then trying to figure out how we're going to tie that into the chassis leg. Okay, so I've had a bit of a think about this now, and originally I was going to try and approach the upper arm mount first, but I think actually what I'll be better off to do is to attach the strut tower to that chassis leg. So I've made a cardboard pattern, which will hopefully do both the front and back. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And I'll cut this out 3mm plate, and we'll be able to like close this off and create like a good 3D structure, which will add so much strength into the front of the car. Again, 3mm is probably a bit overkill, but I'm really not worried about adding weight into this car. It's going to have more than enough power, and it doesn't really weigh a lot as it is. So yeah, 3mm the way to go. Get some cutting done. Right, so I've cut out my bits of steel plate now and put them into position, and the strength is going to be in there no matter what I do now. I just want to try and position them so that they look the best, whether that's going to be squaring the 2 towers off with each other or kind of squaring them off to the chassis rails. I'm not sure, so it's have a little bit of a play around. I need to trim the top of them a little bit, and then we'll get them tacked in. Then we'll think about putting a plate across the back to box it off, and add a bit of strength in there, kind of really start to add some structure in, and then we're on to those upper arm mounts. Right, so I've got those 2 bits now tacked on. I decided to kind of square them to the chassis legs. I don't think it'll look odd. By the time the engine's in, the fact that the strut towers don't parallel up is probably, I don't think anybody's ever going to notice that. I'm also probably going to have a strut brace across from one to the other. Although I'm probably going to have to think ahead quite a lot on that one, because the intake plenum on the engine is very close already to the top of the bonnet. So if I want a strut brace, it's going to have to be a mighty slim one, or I'm going to have to heavily modify the plenum, which I think I'm going to also have to do anyway. But that's a conversation for a different time. What I need to do now is get the back of these plates gusseted down with a big panel, close all that off. That gives us one really solid strut tower then, and then figure out these top mounts. Right, so I've got the kind of main gusset piece and then the top piece tacked in now. I want to take a bit of time to get that top piece right, because I'm hoping that by the time I've welded it up and ground those welds off on the top, it'll look like one solid piece. You know, a bit more OEM, I guess. I don't, as much as I like welding and having lots of welds on show, I think this car will be quite weld heavy already, so where we can kind of dress some up in the engine bay, I want to try and do that. But the next job, now we've got a nice solid tower to work from, is doing these upper arm mounts. So I've got a couple of ideas of how we can do that. Again, it's going to be cardboard patterns and trying to make something, again, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because I want to make something that isn't ugly, but is also going to be strong enough to do the job. Even though they're all going to get covered over anyway, because the upper arm mount will be in the wheel arch, not in the engine bay. There will be an inner wing covering this up. Just a case of playing around with some cardboard, seeing what we can come up with, and then cutting some steel and making some more brackets. Right, so I've cut some pieces of steel up, I've played around with some cardboard patterns, and I've got a rough idea of how I think I'm going to do this. I've cut some steel and it's kind of coming together, but it's one of those where it's probably going to look a bit rough until probably going to be a fair bit of grinding to do after to try and make it look something. It's going to get covered up, it's going to be stuck in the wheel arch, but I still would like it to not look, you know, like lots of bits have just been welded together. I would like it to look like a nice formed piece without actually having to kind of bend anything and work anything out. So I've got some plates. I'm going to tack this one in to start with, parallel with the strut tower, or square with the strut tower. And then I've got some other plates which I'm going to drill some holes in and tack onto that. If that looks right, I'll weld those and then put a cap over the top, and that's going to hopefully gusset them all. But I'll have to weld that from the underneath once I've taken the jig out. So I've got this piece tacked on nice and square. What I'm going to do now is get two more pieces here with a hole in here and here. I'll get them welded in the backside once they're bolted to the jig, and then we'll have a piece in over the top, which is our gusset. So I've got that bracketry all tacked on now, and my holes drilled, and it kind of all mounted into the jig. What I need to do now is add my kind of top gusset. I may have a bit of a front gusset as well, but I won't know what clearance I've got until I can actually put the arm in and kind of operate it at full bump and at full droop. So for now, I'm just going to put a piece across the top, which it'll make it strong enough for now. And then again, we can kind of beef it up at a bit of a later date, really. So again, I'm just going to use a bit more cardboard and yeah, see if I can get something cut out. Cardboard pattern made, steel cut out, tacked and welded on. Obviously there's still a lot of cleaning up to do on this, but what I want to do is to try and keep making progress. I can come back and do the kind of cleaning up and final welds later, as long as we've got enough strength in there to actually bear the weight of the car. I can do all the kind of finer bits at a later date. Basically same again now on the rear of the upper arm mounts, and then same again on the other side. Awesome, I'm excited. Both strut towers in, welded up, all the suspension components, or all of them, but the shock absorbers fitted. The shock absorbers are under a little bit of compression, even at full droop. So I've not put those on yet because I'm not sure we've got quite enough strength to be messing around with the stock springs. We'll probably end up bending some things we don't want to bend yet. We've not quite got enough strength in our towers to take the small amount of compression in those springs. But I'm really happy with how it's coming out now. This is a really significant step in the process. We've got all of the front suspension mounted on the car. I can now begin to get the correct measurements for the front wheels, start thinking about getting those struts mounted, start looking at steering columns, and then one of the next things we need to start looking at is getting the gearbox tunnel in place and prop shaft.